Critical Role, the stream Dungeons & Dragons show featuring everyone's favorite nerdy-ass voice actor, has entered its 10th year running. 10 years of Critical Role. Can you believe that? I mean, 10 years is longer than, like, the average American marriage lasts. Hello, you beautiful people. I am Finn. Welcome back to finnfilms. Those of you that are familiar with my channel and my content know that I am a massive nerd, a lover of all things fantasy and nerdy and Dungeons & Dragons, and of course, our favorite nerdy-ass voice actors, Critical Role. I've been watching these goofy guys and gals since like 2015, really not long after Campaign 1's debut on the Geek and Sundry Twitch channel. And so it's honestly kind of crazy for me to sit here and think that like 10 years later, with all of like the challenges and really crazy things that have happened to me in my life and just in general over the last 10 years, that Critical Role has somehow been probably the most consistent thing in my life. It's been 10 years they've been making me laugh, making me cry, and just telling absolutely fantastic, amazing stories. Like, just take a second to think about how crazy this is. Friends, the arguably most successful and probably most famous and popular sitcom, ran for around 10 years, from 1994 to 2004. And Critical Role, a D&D show, has hit the exact same marker. That's absolutely nuts. Today, I just want to talk to you all about the last 10 years of Critical Role, a D&D game that started out as a scuffed live stream plagued with all sorts of technical issues that has somehow transformed into a 3-campaign epic, its own entire media company spawning books, comics, spin-off shows, and new content, and probably most crazy of all, its own animated show on Amazon Prime. In this video, we're going to be discussing how everything started with Critical Role, where it's at now, and where it's going in the future, and how Critical Role has really impacted my life as a fan. Now, before we get going, I just want to give a little spoiler warning here. I will be discussing campaigns 1, 2, and 3. Primarily, the spoiler warning will be more for like campaigns 1, a little bit from campaign 2, and a little bit from campaign 3, but just consider yourself warned. So then, to begin, I need you all to cast your mind back to the spring of 2015. Wizards of the Coast has recently dropped Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, a long-awaited update to the rule set of Dungeons & Dragons D&D. This update would turn out to be one of the best decisions that this company has ever made, as in short, they reduced the difficulty and really the learning curve for Dungeons & Dragons as a tabletop role-playing game when you compare it to every other edition of Dungeons & Dragons that had been released so far. 5e making it a much more streamlined and really kind of easier game, lowering the learning curve, making it easier for newer players to get into the hobby. You then combine this with the rapid rise of live streaming and online culture. By this point in 2015, Twitch and kind of live streaming in general had really been on the verge of becoming mainstream, with Twitch making a jump from 55 million users in 2014 to 100 million users in 2015. This massive increase in users largely coming from the fact that Twitch as a streaming platform had been purchased by the massive megacorporation Amazon. This massive increase in users also saw a kind of diverse change to the content that was being hosted on the platform. What was for many years a content space that was really dominated by gaming, live streaming gaming, esports, had begun to shift to kind of non-gaming culture with the rise of the just chatting section. And it was really these two worlds kind of coming together, the explosion of popularity with Dungeons & Dragons and interest for D&D with the newest edition, Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and the rise of live streaming becoming more mainstream, that led to the creation of Critical Role. Now, I've been a D&D fan for a long time. As a teenager and in high school and early college, I did play a lot of Dungeons & Dragons, but it never really occurred to me that, like, watching someone else play D&D, especially in a live stream or, like, YouTube video type content, could be something that was entertaining, especially not something as entertaining as watching a TV show like Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones. I still very much remember the first kind of Dungeons & Dragons game, Dungeons & Dragons content that I watched on YouTube. It was the Penny Arcade guys, the Wizards of the Coast employees playing with Dungeon Master Chris Perkins. I'm pretty sure it was one of their PAX live games where they would play live in the PAX audience where they were promoting Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition all the way back in like, I think late 2014, early 2015, sometime around there. I remember I was a freshman in college and I was working this internship at the time and I was watching this Penny Arcade game in the background, and the next thing I know, the game was over and YouTube had auto-played the next recommended video, and that video was Critical Role Campaign 1, Episode 1, The Journey to Craghammer on the Geek and Sundry YouTube channel. And right then and there, I fell in love almost instantly. I would spend the next few days binge watching the few episodes that had aired of Critical Role so far so I could watch the party's journey within Craghammer in the Underdark live on Thursday night later that week. And nearly 10 years later, I've been watching ever since, barely missing a single Thursday night live stream of Critical Role. Now, if you were around for the early days of Critical Role Campaign 1, or maybe you're a newer fan, but you've gone back and watched the old VODs, the old episodes of early Critical Role, then you will know that Critical Role used to be, well, very different from what it is now. For the first kind of year, maybe year and a half, Critical Role was a real kind of scuffed mom-and-pop lo-fi production that new fans probably wouldn't even recognize. There were all sorts of technical issues, a lot of microphone issues that plagued this live stream in the early days on Geek and Sundry, and goddamn, was it glorious. Now, I'm not saying that early Critical Role was necessarily better than the Critical Role that we have now, but it was definitely different. Like, for one, the game was actually live, it wasn't pre-recorded. The cast would regularly interact with the chat, even during the games. You would oftentimes see Sam or Travis with their phones out, reading chat and responding to chat during the game. And for some absolutely insane reason, they decided to have chat on the screen for the broadcast, and I think one of the best decisions that Critical Role ever made was nixing that idea. And in general, it just kind of felt more like a lo-fi kind of production. Like, we were getting a sneak peek into like a group of friends' home game who had just kind of thrown together like some microphones and a couple of cameras and were just playing their game normally around the table. Of course, this group of friends just happened to be a really talented actors and actresses led by a dungeon master who many people in kind of D&D believe is one of the greatest DMs to ever do it, one of the greatest storytellers of all time in Matt Mercer. Over the first year, a lot of the technical issues would eventually get sorted out, and around 6 months after its debut, when the Briarwood arc started for Percy's backstory, you just knew that you were watching something special at the time. Now, while it is fun and nostalgic doing a lot of this kind of membering to the early days of Critical Role, there are a lot of fans out there, especially old heads that were around during the early days of Campaign 1, who will use everything that I just said to point out and to make their argument that Critical Role has fallen off hard compared to the early days. They believe that it was better off in the early days of Campaign 1, that the fame, the money, the increase in budget, the better set, the quality of the production, the move away from a live game to a pre-recorded game that was only really because of the pandemic and the ease of schedule for the cast, that all of these things have led to Critical Role falling off, that it's not nearly as good as it was back in the early days, back in my day, as they would say. Objectively, I think this is false, but I do understand why a lot of these old heads, old school fans might think this way. While yes, I will say that I do miss back when Critical Role was live and not pre-recorded, as there was kind of something special. There was this special feeling about the live interaction that you would get with the fans from the crew, but it's completely understandable why Critical Role as a broadcast would ultimately switch to a pre-recorded broadcast. As well, I think that there is kind of a lot of like early nostalgia bias for like these early arcs, these early like kind of first year of Critical Role Campaign 1. Like, if you go in back and watch the first like 30 to 50 episodes of Campaign 1, I mean, some of them are like beyond scuffed. Like, I'm talking at times there are moments in the show where it's borderline unwatchable in terms of like technical difficulties and like audio difficulties.
So we are playing the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. We recently converted over from Pathfinder, for those who play Pathfinder, and one of our players was a gunslinger.
Now the main problem area is up here. All of this going on up here is what's causing me the most physical discomfort.
As well, the game and the tone of the game in general was just like way more chaotic than it is now. If you think that there was Chaos Crew in Campaign 2 and Campaign 3, you know nothing about the early days of Campaign 1. Again, this Chaos Crew feel did kind of contribute to that like home game feel, the kind of like fun in terms of like the cast goofing around, interacting with one another, but at times there was so much like chaos going on at the table, there was so much table talk between the players that it was difficult to even understand what was going on in the story. Obviously, as well, for the early days of Campaign 1, there was the elephant in the room for those first, 27, 29 episodes of Critical Role's cast member Orion Akaba and his character Tiberius. I mean, who could forget such infamous moments as that time that Tiberius chopped up that person with a chainsaw?
I'm gonna pull out my crow blade. and I'm gonna throw it in the air and cast telekinesis on it.
Okay. As you do, it catches itself spinning in the air up ahead of you. It's like strange, vibrating, high-pitched whine sound as the blades are spinning in rapid circular motion.
And I'm gonna go, stupid bitch. And I'm gonna huck it at the chick.
Oh. So, the unconscious woman, face down on the ground, the blade just tears through and grinds a large wedge out of her back, spraying a bit of gore across the nearby grass. Thankfully, she was asleep, so she probably didn't feel it. It was so fast. But...
Or that time that Tiberius hit on Vexalia, and it very much looked like Travis was about to lose his shit.
As Vex is saying this, Tiberius is getting a half chub.
A what?
Hey.
Well, that's just weird.
You can't see it because it's inside.
Yes, because you said it out loud. So.
Anyway.
I'm just saying, strategy.
Fair enough.
Strategy.
Oh, it's strategy, Chuck. All right.
Strategy chub.
Okay.
I've done a whole video going into detail about like Orion and his kind of problematic like player tendencies that happened at the Critical Role table. So if you're interested in that, then go and click that video in the eye above. But for now, I'm just going to leave the topic of Orion and Tiberius there for now. For me, I think that Critical Role really started to hit its stride in terms of like epic storytelling, amazing storytelling, and character acting during the Briarwood arc, the early arc of Campaign 1. And it's at this point that I really started to realize that, like, wow, this is what Dungeons & Dragons has the potential to be in terms of, like, serious storytelling, dark, intricate storytelling with all sorts of character progression and character themes. I mean, the performance from Taliesin during the Briarwood arc is sublime and is arguably one of his best performances throughout all of the 10 years of Critical Role so far.
Straight chest shots, and I'm just firing chest shots, and I'm just making a hole the size of a baseball in his chest. And as it happens, as I keep unloading, the gun still breaks, and I'm still pulling the trigger. You fool, your soul is forfeit! Die! Die!
You have a poison in your mind, and the fact that you can't see it makes me so sad.
There is a reason why Percy is one of my favorite characters of any of the player characters, and the Briarwood arc is easily one of my favorite arcs from all of the campaigns 1, 2, and 3, and to me, it's why Season 1 of Legend of Vox Machina is probably my favorite season of the animated show so far. This is where things really started to change. I mean, this arc had everything. A dramatic and tragic character story with some real character progression for our edgy boy Percy. This was the introduction as well for the first kind of major villain of the series in Silas and Delilah Briarwood, a pair of conniving, truly evil and cruel people with a tragic and almost heartwarming love story backstory between them that almost makes them seem relatable if it wasn't for the fact that they were just so sadistic and just straight up downright cruel and evil. Critical Role has had some amazing villains that Matt Mercer has created over the course of the 10 years and the 3 campaigns, but to me, it is the Briarwoods, it is Silas and Delilah that are easily the best villains that Matt Mercer has created so far, probably aside from the likes of like Trent Ickathon and Ludinus Delath. This arc as well had a major mystery, and the first kind of instance of Matt using long-term storytelling in the streamed game with the introduction of Vecna, the Briarwood's ritual, a story beat that wouldn't come to its zenith like until 2 years later with the final arc of Campaign 1, the Vecna arc. This arc, the Briarwood arc, really had it all and then some, and to me, it really was the catalyst for Critical Role's success and its jump to become the most popular Dungeons & Dragons game, the most popular D&D content ever, and for a series of time, the most popular live stream on all of Twitch. We need to remember that at this time, during like 2015 to 2017, there was so many D&D live stream games, so much D&D content out there. Games like Critical Role and other D&D content creators and live stream Dungeons & Dragons games really made D&D more popular than it had ever been since its creation by Gary Gygax. This was a game that was once thought for kind of like nerdy, dorky fantasy kids, you know, like social outcasts, theater kids, this game now becoming a game for everyone, from jocks to celebrities and everyone in between, a game that had somehow become actually cool. Like, a lot of people don't know this, but Critical Role for a long time was arguably the most popular thing on Twitch, especially from 2015 to 2018. Here's a time lapse of the most sub channels on Twitch from the years 2016 to 2021, and we see that Geek and Sundry for a large portion of these years dominates the subscriber numbers, and this is honestly mostly due to Critical Role. I mean, take a look at this point here in December 2017 and January 2018. Geek and Sundry peaks at over 100,000 subscribers. For context, that's a conservative estimate of somewhere around $250,000 made that month, assuming that all 10,000 of these subscribers are tier 1 subscribers, and assuming that this video is actually accurate in terms of live streamed, subscribers at that time on Twitch. As well, this massive peak here in subscribers on this time lapse just so happened to line up with the debut of Critical Role Campaign 2 in the Mighty 9 on January 11th, 2018. So then, it makes perfect sense why just a few months later, in June of 2018, Critical Role would announce its split from Geek and Sundry and the formation of the Critical Role Productions LLC, as the cast wanted more creative control over their creation and its production. Which honestly, this seems like a perfectly normal, understandable move why they would do this. They had outgrown Geek and Sundry. They were by far the most popular show on Geek and Sundry. This was their IP, their creation. And if anything, I'm kind of surprised that they hadn't made this move away from Geek and Sundry to start their own media company earlier. Campaign 2 then was a very interesting shift from Campaign 1, but one that fans very much seem to enjoy. In general, to me, Campaign 1 is a kind of example of a much more classic kind of Dungeons & Dragons fantasy story. A group of ragtag adventurers that all come together and find themselves, as this unlikely group of heroes, very much a kind of classic tale of like a hero's journey type story archetype, a classic story of the fight between good and evil, whether it's the Briarwoods, the Chroma Conclaves, or an evil god like Vecna. Campaign 2, though, was very much a shift of tone and a shift of the type of story that Critical Role wanted to tell. In general, when you compare the Mighty 9 to Vox Machina, they are much more morally gray. We regularly see the Mighty 9 make decisions out of their own kind of self-interest and what they believe to be right. The greater story as a whole of Campaign 2 really kind of reflecting this moral kind of grayness of the group, the characters. Campaign 2 really focusing more on kind of the politics of Exandria, specifically the politics of Wildmount, between the war between the Dwendalian Empire and the dynasty of Xhorhas, where neither side really is objectively more right or wrong than the other. Matt very much turning a lot of kind of Dungeons & Dragons fantasy tropes on their head, specifically by humanizing the peoples of the dynasty, the races of the Xhorhasian dynasty, such as dark elves, goblins, bugbears, really all of these races that are traditionally viewed as kind of like evil in like traditional Dungeons & Dragons fantasy lore. But we see Matt here in Campaign 2 really humanize these people and show that in Exandria, they are just normal people, neither inherently good nor bad, but just people with their own stories and their own motivations for their actions. This shift in tone from Matt Mercer in the story, as well as in the player characters, in the kind of moral grayness from their characters from the Mighty 9, very much seemed to resonate with the Critical Role fanbase, as arguably Campaign 2 is the most popular of the 3 Critical Role campaigns so far. At least if you measure popularity in terms of Critical Role's metrics, specifically like their viewership and their sub count, though these numbers are slightly skewed due to the pandemic from 2019 to 2020. Since everyone was stuck at home, Twitch really went through a massive boom during these years, and this very much can be seen in Critical Role's numbers. Of course, it's arguable which campaign was ultimately the best or the most popular. Everyone's going to have their own opinion, so I'll really leave it up to you all in the comment section down below to argue that. For me, though, I very much enjoyed the tone shift that occurred in Campaigns 2 and Campaign 3. As much as I love the story of Campaign 1 and Vox Machina as a group of characters, Campaigns 2 and 3 to me just feel so much more real. Again, this idea of really kind of morally gray characters, a group of characters who don't necessarily view themselves as even heroes. They're more just a group of people who are trying to survive in this world and constantly doing what they believe is the right thing at the time, even if it doesn't necessarily line up with what we think is the morally good thing. Campaign 2 would continue to go on for over 3 years, debuting on January 11th, 2018, and then eventually ending on June 3rd, 2021. By this point, Critical Role as a company had really expanded massively. Critical Role exploring a variety of different content, from talk shows to starting their own publishing company, Darrington Press, and probably most famous of all, their massive Kickstarter for their animated project, Legend of Vox Machina. The Kickstarter raising so much money that Critical Role would make a deal with Amazon for an entire season, teaming up with the animation studio Titmouse, the studio behind the Avatar The Last Airbender, to make The Legend of Vox Machina Season 1, which would debut in early 22, getting a pretty insane 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and being so successful that it has gone on to produce 2 more seasons. This then all lined up pretty well with the start of Critical Role's third campaign, the story of Bell's Hells, that debuted on October 21st, 2021. The hype of this new campaign propelling Critical Role to a crazy milestone of 139,559 subscribers, putting it at number 9 for the most subscribed Twitch channel of all time, at least according to Wikipedia. Again, similar to Campaign 2, Campaign 3, the story of Bell's Hells, was a major kind of tone shift, especially from Campaign 1, with Campaign 3 being, in my opinion, the most ambitious story that has been told by Matt Mercer to date. If Campaign 1 was a traditional fantasy story and Campaign 2 was a more morally gray kind of story of the politics of Exandria, Campaign 3 is an epic, a depiction of long-term storytelling at its finest, which explores the deeper roots and lores of the world of Exandria through this long-running mystery of Exandria's Red Moon Ruidus. The campaign really examining the role of divinity in this world, turning much of what we know about the lore of Exandria and Critical Role straight up on its head. Matt posing such questions to us as, what is the role of the gods? What even are the gods? Are the gods morally good? Are they really that much different from the mortals that they have created? Campaign 3 as well gave us the Exandria Unlimited miniseries with Brendan Lee Mulligan, which gave us insight into how the Great War of the Calamity, the battle between gods, took place in Critical Role lore. EXU Calamity being, in my opinion, the best piece of content that Critical Role has ever made, and gave us probably some of my favorite moments that have ever happened at a Critical Role table.
You're telling me that the god of death is a mortal? I hate to say I told you so!
At the time of recording on January 12, 2025, Campaign 3 is currently nearing its climax, at least it seems that way, with the most recent episode being Campaign 3, Episode 118, as it very much seems like Campaign 3 could come to an end within the next month or two. However, knowing Matt Mercer and all of the twists and turns that he likes to throw at us, it is impossible to predict just how this campaign, how this story will end, let alone when it's going to end. Campaign 3, I think, has probably been the most divisive of the 3 Critical Role campaigns. Since Campaign 3's debut back in October of 2021, that's almost 4 years ago, we've seen Critical Role slowly begin to kind of drop off in terms of live viewership numbers. Now again, this is due to a kind of variety of factors. D&D 5e is nowhere near the height of its popularity as it was for kind of the first 4 years since its release from 2015 to 2019. As well, many tabletop fans have grown tired of Dungeons & Dragons 5th editions and its many shortcomings, especially as a system in terms of its combat. As well, Twitch as a live streaming platform has really kind of leveled off in terms of its crazy viewership boom that happened during the pandemic. As well, a lot of the fan base and a lot of the fans of Critical Role are torn when it comes to the story of Campaign 3. With some fans absolutely loving Campaign 3 and its story and the pacing that it's taken so far, other fans not really liking it as much, giving up on the campaign after just a year. However, I do think that the explanation for Critical Role's kind of drop in viewership over the last year or two is more for the first 2 reasons than really Campaign 3 being divisive in terms of its story. Don't get me wrong, Critical Role is still massively popular in 2025, but it's definitely not as popular as it was when you compare it to the first kind of 6 or 7 years of the show running. Even so, I can't see Critical Role going anywhere anytime soon. With massively successful projects like Legend of Vox Machina to their publishing company and their many books and comics to Matt Mercer launching 2 new tabletop games in Candela Obscura and his fantasy game Daggerheart, Critical Role then has grown massively from just this group of nerdy-ass voice actors to a media empire and arguably the face of kind of Dungeons & Dragons, while somehow I think most surprisingly of all, they were able to keep a lot of the same feelings that they are just this group of friends and nerdy-ass voice actors sitting around a table having fun and just playing like they normally would in their home game. Yes, Critical Role has changed. It has transformed into, again, a massive media production empire. We are a long ways away from those scuffed early days of Campaign 1. But to me, the feeling of genuineness of the people at the table is very much still there. The interactions at the table, even 10 years later, never feel forced or feel like one of the players is really kind of phoning it in for this episode. And somehow they've managed to avoid real major controversies, which is saying a lot, especially in the tabletop role-playing game space, with all of the Dungeons & Dragons horror stories out there and all of the streamed games and dungeon masters that have gotten themselves canceled. To me, it honestly is crazy to look back and think that the one constant thing in my life that has happened over the last 10 years has somehow been Critical Role. Critical Role has been with me arguably through the most formative years and most challenging years of my entire life. My 20s. It's been there for me through my college days, through absolutely horrible breakups and the loss of friends, during some of the biggest changes in my life. It was there for me even when I was across the world and I got to live in Japan for an entire year, a year that was one of the best years of my entire life. Although it did take me a little while to get used to watching Critical Role live on Friday mornings as opposed to Thursday nights. Throughout all of the chaos and changes that have happened in my life, Critical Role and its community has been there for me, has been the one consistent thing throughout the last 10 years. It's very much like an old friend that is always there to comfort you, to bring you some nostalgic, cozy warmth and calm to your life and all of the chaos that is life. I don't know what the future is going to hold for Critical Role. I don't know what the future of Critical Role will look like. I don't know how Campaign 3 will end or what will happen in Campaign 4. What I am pretty sure of, though, is I don't think Critical Role is going anywhere anytime soon. And as long as they stick to what got them this far, their genuine selves and telling amazing stories, I think that people are going to continue to watch and support them. I know that I will be one of them. Obviously, Critical Role can't go on forever. Like any great show or series, eventually it has to come to an end or change in some permanent way. So as fans, I think all we can do is really be thankful for an amazing 10 years and enjoy Critical Role for as long as we have it. I just want to say thank you, Critical Role, for these last amazing 10 years of storytelling. Thank you for reintroducing my love of Dungeons & Dragons and roleplay back into my life. And thank you for being a consistent source of entertainment and escapism, and for being the constant rock in this ocean of insanity that is life for many of us out there. Thank you for 10 years of amazing storytelling, and I know that I speak for a lot of Critical Role fans out there when I say, here's hoping for 10 more years of amazing storytelling and Critical Role content. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it through the entirety of my mushy rant, then I super appreciate you. If you did enjoy this video or you learned something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to support me, and it really does go a long way in putting these videos into the algorithm. Let me know in the comment section down below, how has Critical Role impacted you over the last 10 years, and what was your first kind of memory with Critical Role? If you did enjoy this video, then why don't you check out some of my other videos on screen now, and as always, thank you so much for continuing to watch and support me. I hope to see you in the next video. Until next time, stay safe out there. Peace, love, adu.